Hello, I'm Mr. Kaysen. Welcome to my video on writing a literary analysis essay. I instruct the Thomas Nelson Community College College Composition 1 and 2 courses at Jamestown High School. This video was made for College Composition 2, part of the literary analysis module. Right now we're going to cover the characteristics of a literary analysis and how to go about writing one. The slides I am using come courtesy of Purdue University's online writing lab, a great writing resource, one I use and provide in my class. And it's a great reference guide, anything from how to write an essay to specific MLA citing um, rules. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so what is literary analysis? It's literary, it's analysis, it's an argument. It may also involve research on and analysis of secondary sources. So the main point that we need to remember when beginning to write a literary analysis for the first time is that it is just like a persuasive or argumentative essay in that it is an argument that needs to be supported with evidence. In this case, in literary analysis, your evidence will mainly come from the text or the texts you're analyzing. The main text or text that you're attempting to analyze are called primary sources. So, for instance, if we're going to write a literary analysis on the book Moby Dick, then that Moby Dick, the novel of Moby Dick, is our primary source. You may have learned that in College Composition 1 or in high school, but we'll cover the difference between primary and secondary sources in this video again. Okay, so the basics. Important literary concepts. When writing a literary analysis, it is important to read your primary text paying special attention to literary concepts. These concepts help us break down the text into pieces that we can manage to craft into evidence or into an argument thesis, right? I'm going to be referring to Moby Dick in this lecture because the slides coming from the online writing lab used Moby Dick as an example, and you may be a little bit familiar, even if you haven't read the book, you may be a little bit familiar with the story, the tale of a mad captain of a whaling ship who's obsessed with killing this white whale that bit off his leg. So I'll just be referring to that story. Of course, if you're totally unfamiliar with Moby Dick, it's worth a good Google. So the plot, right? The plot is basically what happens. The setting is where it happens, where it takes place in terms of location and what point in history does it take place? Present or is it in the past? Narration and point of view. What perspective is this story told from? Characterization. How do characters develop? How do they change? Are they static? Are they dynamic? Symbol. Do certain things that appear in the story um, represent something else, right? For instance, the white whale in Moby Dick may be a symbol for evil or the devil or something, something else that's bad, right? Metaphor. When Ishmael, the narrator, right, in Moby Dick, describes the whaling ship. The whaling ship itself is almost meant to be a metaphor for American society, right? Genre, is it a science fiction? Is it horror? Is it, those are all examples of genre. And then, of course, how does the author use irony or ambiguity? Ambiguity is um, kind of, it could mean two things at once or more, it could mean more than one thing, right? We can't really pin it down. And of course, other key concepts are historical context, right? Like during Moby Dick, it was during the 1800s. It was vastly different than what our present day. Socio-political and economic context, right? It took place in America in the 1800s, not China during the Cultural Revolution or something like that, right? There's varying context. So what makes it unique to that specific time and and political ideas that were around, and social ideas and economic things that were happening, right? Ideology is important, right? So capitalism during this time in Moby Dick is really an important ideology that influences the book. Racism, also another example. Multiple voices, like what do the characters represent and the narrator? What are they representing? Are they representing different voices in society? Various critical orientations and literary theory. You can learn. That's getting into some really complicated stuff that you will encounter later on in higher level English courses, and we will briefly discuss in college composition 2 during our week of literary analysis. So usually literary analysis will involve a discussion of a text as writing, thus the term literary, which means having to do with letters. This will involve the use of certain concepts that are very specifically associated with literature. Metaphor, for instance, right? The Captain Ahab's obsession with finding the white whale and killing it is a metaphor for our own obsessions or our individualism or something like that, right? The setting, it's that's very important in the book. It's the setting is literally across the globe as they sail trying to find the white whale, right? So these are important things that you need to take into consideration when crafting an argument. An analysis of a literary work may discuss how the various components of an individual work relate to each other. So, for instance, my theoretical essay on Moby Dick is just focusing only on Moby Dick, right? And maybe my thesis covers the whale is a symbol of evil or something like that, right? But we'll get into that later. You could also write about how two separate literary works deal with similar concepts or forms, right? I could compare Moby Dick with how another like Mark Twain during the similar time periods, right? Um, you could also do how concepts and forms in literary works relate to larger aesthetic, political, social, economic, or religious contexts, right? So I could take Moby Dick and I could directly make an argument about how it displays certain things about the American economy during that time. That would be, and then I draw from the text evidence to support that argument, right? So you can either focus on the text itself, look at the components of the text, have an argument from that. You can compare, contrast two texts, and you could also take the text and argue that it shows some sort of uh, aesthetic, political, social, economic, or religious context, right? Writing an argument. How is literary analysis and argument? All right. So when writing a literary analysis, you will focus on specific attributes of the text, like we covered just before, right? Those literary concepts. When discussing these attributes, you want to make sure that you are making arguable point, making a specific arguable point about these attributes, right? You want to be focused on one thing. You will defend this point with reasons and evidence that come from the text, much like you do with your argumentative essays, right? You have a thesis, you have a position on one issue, and you back that up with evidence. It's pretty much the same thing, only you're drawing evidence from this one primary text. So thesis statements, right? We want it to be focused and we want it to be arguable, right? It needs to be somewhat controversial. And when I say controversial, I mean you could reasonably argue against it. So Moby Dick is about the problem of evil. Is that a focused thesis statement? No, that's not a really focused thesis statement. It's very vague. The problem of evil. Moby Dick is boring and pointless. Well, that is very much an opinion and it's very argumentative, but it's not exactly what we're looking for in a literary analysis thesis statement. Your thesis statement should be geared to kind of join the discussion about the text. This thesis statement does not generate any discussion about the text. Moby Dick is about a big white whale. Well, though that may be true, this thesis statement isn't very arguable, and no one's going to disagree with it. What we want to really avoid in literary analysis is summarizing the text. That's not what we need to do. You can summarize scenes and as a way to introduce evidence to support your thesis, but we don't want a big, long summarization of a text. And then the use of whiteness in Moby Dick illustrates the uncertainty of the meaning of life that Ishmael expresses throughout the novel. So this would be an excellent thesis statement, right? The use of whiteness, whiteness here, uh, the use of whiteness, meaning that the kind of if you kind of have to fill in the blank, Herman Melville, the author, uses whiteness, and we read here whiteness as a symbol, right? So the author, the person who's writing this thesis statement is probably going to have a paragraph discussing how whiteness is a symbol, is meant to be a symbol for something, right? In Moby Dick illustrates the uncertainty of the meaning of life. Okay, so the whiteness is a symbol for the meaning of life that Ishmael expresses throughout the novel. So what I'm going to read in this essay is evidence that supports the claim that whiteness is the uncertainty of the meaning of life. Whiteness represents that, is a symbol for that. And then I'm also going to read about how Ishmael expresses that kind of meaninglessness throughout the novel. So that's already, you can see how this argument is going to be supported. All right, so how to support a thesis statement, right? So just like what the previous slide said, um, it kind of purviews what kind of evidence is going to happen. So direct quotations, probably Ishmael. We're going to hear a lot from Ishmael. Um, the author of that thesis statement could, summarize the scenes and paraphrase what other people say. That's going to be excellent evidence, and that should be the first thing you look for when writing a literary analysis essay. What you can also do is you can cite other critics' opinions. And this is also very important. So if another person wrote an essay and got it published in a peer-reviewed journal, preferably, not a blog, we're not looking for blogs, we're looking for a academic peer-reviewed journal, and they have published an essay that has a argument that is similar to yours, or uh, has certain arguments that can support also your thesis, you can include those and cite their work. And then, of course, you can always draw evidence from historical facts and social facts that kind of give us more of a context of what that time was like, and understand what the text kind of means, and that can then support your thesis statement. Always remember to read carefully and highlight useful passages and quotes. So that's why it's really important to read your primary text carefully. Take notes and highlight certain portions. If you run across a statement from a character that you feel is going to be like, oh, that explains a lot, this could be used, you need to write it down, highlight it, so that you can easily find it later when you're writing your essay. So secondary sources, those critics' opinions, those academics that are publishing in those peer-reviewed journals, those are going to be very helpful for you in kind of developing your argument more. So as you read secondary sources, as you find those sources on those databases from those journals, you are going to be realizing certain things while what they're saying can actually also support your thesis statement. You should not have the same thesis statement as those critics. So secondary sources are a book or article that discusses the text that you are discussing. A book or article that discusses a theory related to the argument you are making. Again, those are literary theories. We're going to, in college composition, we're going to provide you a very brief infographic about literary theory. You don't need to know too much about this right now. We're just trying to introduce you to literary analysis. And then a book or article that discusses the social and historical context of the text you are discussing, right? So all of these are secondary sources that are going to provide more evidence for you to support your thesis statement. So you could definitely we'll make another video on academic databases. We'll go specifically into Thomas Nelson's databases that focus on literary analysis. Of course, there's a dictionary of literary biography. And then there's discipline-specific sources which are available through the Thomas Nelson Community College library through their databases. Of course, you can always use Google, but again, you need to be extra careful about the sources. We don't want blog posts. We want something that's been published in a peer-reviewed journal. That's the gold standard that we're looking for, and what your professors will look for in your future higher level courses. And of course, in your various texts and your books that you read during your research, it's always good to look at the back of the book in the bibliography section. A copy of Moby Dick may also, in the back, provide certain companion texts that may help you in analyzing the text, give you different perspectives on the text. Those are always a great resource to have. And then, of course, your instructor will be able to help you also find secondary sources. But please try to use those databases and other places first before asking your instructor. So integrating secondary sources, when you use these other, when you cite these other literary analysis essays, these articles and journals, when you use secondary sources, be sure show how they relate to your thesis. Always connect your thesis. Don't use them as tangents just to fill up the page or reach the word count. That's not going to be useful. Your professor is going to see right through it, and it's not going to work. Don't overuse a secondary source, or for that matter, secondary sources in general. Keep it. Normally, when you get a essay prompt, your professor will say, "Oh, this needs to be 5 sources, 1 primary source, and 4 secondary sources," right? So they will prescribe how many secondary sources are required in the essay. For a 10-page literary essay that you may have to write in English 300 or something like that, you may see something like that. For college composition 1, for college composition 2, we are going to not be giving you that many. Of course, it depends on your instructor. Remember that this is your paper, your argument. The secondary source are just helping you out. They do not, of course, do not plagiarize, and do not solely rely on 1 or 2 secondary sources for the brunt of for doing the most work in terms of analyzing the text. That is your job. You need to be analyzing text. You need to be using those literary concepts and come up with something original, and not just summarize various critics. Uh, but it would be, but it's also helpful to maybe if critics disagree with one another, you can then kind of come up with a synthesis, a compromise between them, or maybe you will take a side. I don't know, but you need to come up and have original analysis yourself. Okay, so that is how to write a literary analysis essay. So just remember, be familiar with literary terms. If you need to Google literary term, Google them. Do that. Review some literary terms before you start writing, because if you know your literary terms, you will be able to take notes better. Remember to analyze specific items. Ask yourself questions when you read. Is this a metaphor? How is this character being developed, right? Those are the questions you need to be asking yourself. Or how does what is the what does this show about the context of the time, of the historical context, right? Yeah. Is the author trying to make a political statement? Make an argument. Your thesis should be an argument in literary analysis, not a summary of the story. And of course, make appropriate use of secondary sources. Don't rely too much on secondary sources. Only use them to support your thesis. And of course, always consult the instructors and tutors for help when needed. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed this lecture. Please let me know if you let your instructor know if you need any clarification on anything we've covered here.